Hello, I'm Ann Herbst. I'm a senior environmental planner with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, that's MAPC. Thank you for joining this virtual presentation and feedback session. We've been working with the town of Needham to complete two separate but very much related plans. One focuses on preparing for natural hazards and the other on preparing for future climate impacts. We had hoped to do an in-person meeting, but the need for social distancing has moved us online. I hope that you and your families are well and safe at home, and I look forward to future opportunities to meet together in person. This is the agenda for the presentation. I will first provide background on the two plans. I'll review the latest data on climate observations and projections, and then focus on local impacts in Needham. I'll summarize the results of a workshop held in January that identified Needham climate vulnerabilities, strengths, and future priorities. Finally, I'll provide information on how you can share your questions, observations, and priorities. First, I want to acknowledge the leadership of the project team. As you can see, we have participation across many of the town's departments. We are also lucky to have Eleanor Rossellini from the Green Needham Collaborative on the team. Under Rebecca Ping's leadership, the team planned the January workshop and is in the process of developing the hazard mitigation plan. They've been working hard to assure the success of these plans. This slide gives a quick overview of the two plans. Hazard mitigation planning is overseen by FEMA and focuses on natural hazards. The left column lists all the hazards we are addressing in the hazard mitigation plan. Hazard mitigation focuses on natural weather-driven occurrences, not terrorism or chemical spills, for example. It is also not an emergency response plan. The focus is on taking preventative steps to address natural hazards. The Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness, or MVP program, is sponsored by the state and focuses on climate-related hazards. As it turns out, earthquakes are the only natural hazard that are not projected to be impacted by climate change. As you can see, the MVP program is organized around considering impacts to the environment, infrastructure, and society. In the next few slides, I will provide brief background on each program. The Federal Disaster Mitigation Act was passed in the year 2000. It set a goal for all municipalities across the country to have a hazard mitigation plan. However, this is a goal, it's not actually a requirement. But FEMA does have a carrot for compliance, and that is that in order to be eligible for FEMA mitigation grants, towns must have a hazard mitigation plan. The impetus for these plans was that across the country, FEMA was seeing this cycle of disaster, rebuilding, and then the same disaster, damage, and rebuilding in the same way all over again. The goal of these plans is to interrupt the cycle. Disaster events are costly to communities and to private citizens, and often involve a lot of human suffering. So we want to analyze our vulnerabilities and address them before the next disaster. This slide illustrates the planning process. The town team has pretty much completed the first 4 steps of updating hazards and facilities. This presentation is designed to update you on our work and get your suggestions for the mitigation strategies that will be developed in step 6. One of the tasks of the town team was to identify critical infrastructure, known flooding areas, fire risk, and anticipated future development locations. We put all of that together on a map to assess potential risk. We'll look more closely at a Needham map in an upcoming slide. This is a partial list of mitigation measures that existed before the first plan was developed. I certainly won't try to read them all or expect you to read through them, but I just show them to point out that the town has been addressing natural hazards long before these planning processes started. Strategies ranging from enforcing regulations to ongoing maintenance to land protection and public education. Many of the mitigation efforts are really woven into the daily tasks of town departments. In the next step, the town team will draft new mitigation strategies. We will hold an additional public meeting to allow for review of the final draft plan, and it will be placed on the town website. The plan goes through a somewhat lengthy review process with MEMA and FEMA, and when finally adopted, the town will be eligible to apply for grants to implement the mitigation measures. Turning to the MVP program, in September 2016, Governor Baker signed Executive Order 569, instructing state governments to provide assistance to cities and towns to complete climate change vulnerability assessments and resiliency action plans. This led to the launch of the MVP program. Needham applied for and received a grant to become certified as an MVP community. The certification requires a one-day workshop and this public feedback session. As part of the MVP program, we produced a report that summarizes the workshop. I will share the link to the draft report at the end of this presentation. The final report will incorporate your feedback. Much like the FEMA Hazard Mitigation Program, the town will be eligible for implementation grants when it completes the project. In January, we held the one-day workshop. Town staff, leadership, and representatives of community organizations spent a day reviewing climate hazards, considering Needham's strengths and vulnerabilities, and developing proposals to address them. These were our goals. We have the same goals for this presentation. We want to get your feedback about priorities and anything you would add to what was identified at the workshop. Each of you brings your expertise and knowledge of conditions in Needham. This is an opportunity to shape Needham's future and ensure that it remains a strong and vibrant community. Next, I'll review the climate information presented at the workshop. I do want to acknowledge that we may not all have the same view of climate change, what may happen in the future, and its causes. The climate projections provided by the state indicate that extreme weather events will become more frequent and more severe. The following slides will provide those projections. But I respect that each of us has our own perspective that inform our thoughts on the need to take action. In any case, Needham has experienced extreme weather in the past. We know extreme events will happen again in the future, so I think it's likely we can all agree on the need to be prepared. This slide provides a snapshot of the concept of climate warming. Solar energy comes in from the sun, and some heat is radiated back to space. But some is trapped by gases in the atmosphere that function like a blanket holding heat in. That is what keeps our planet temperature regulated. It's a natural condition. Without this, the planet would be too cold to support life. But industrialization has led to a tremendous increase in the concentration of gases in the atmosphere because of the combustion of fossil fuels. Typically, people refer to these gases as greenhouse gases. Generally, we talk about carbon dioxide the most because it's the most abundant of the gases. This chart shows the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere starting in 1880. This comes from measurements taken from an observatory in Hawaii. The slide shows how temperature has been increasing with carbon dioxide concentrations. The next few slides look at changes that have already occurred and changes projected for the future. The first impact, and the one that fuels the others, is an increase in temperature. Temperatures recorded at the Blue Hill Observatory in Milton have increased nearly 3 degrees Fahrenheit since 1831. For those interested in local climate data, the Blue Hill Observatory is a valuable research. You can find weather records on their website. Projections, by their nature, are neither observed nor documented, so you will always see a range of projections because of the inherent uncertainty in predicting the future. There are two basic sources of uncertainty. The first is that scientists model impacts, and depending on their level of confidence in the model, the range will be larger or smaller. The second is that we don't know what future greenhouse gas emissions will be. Most models provide a projection for a lower and a higher emissions scenario. You can see that in this graphic. These projections are from the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center at UMass Amherst. You can see that in both scenarios, there's the potential for many more days with temperatures over 90 degrees before the end of the century. But greater success in reducing greenhouse gas emissions will result in fewer high heat days. We have already seen a steady increase in annual precipitation in the Boston area over the past 50 years. We have also seen a significant increase in the size of our largest rainfall events across the Northeast US, and an increase in the number of more moderate rainfall events. There is less scientific certainty in rainfall projections, but agreement on the trend, and that is for more rain annually and larger rain events generally, and also a shift to more rain in the winter and early spring, and slightly less in the summer and fall. This slide shows projections for the 10-year, 24-hour storm, a figure typically used to size stormwater infrastructure. You can see that it's gone up from 1961 to 2014, and the future rainfall projections were done for the city of Cambridge. Even though more rain is projected, it is also the case that more frequent summer-fall droughts are predicted. This is due to a combination of earlier snowmelt, slightly less rain in the summer and fall, and warmer temperatures that will increase evaporation. This slide shows sea level rise to date as recorded at the Boston Harbor Tide Station in downtown Boston. It amounts to nearly a foot in the last century. This slide shows projected sea level rise. The range of projections varies significantly. The two biggest sources of uncertainty are, again, future greenhouse gas emissions and also the extent to which melting of land-based ice glaciers will occur. Needham is not on the coast, so there won't be direct impacts from sea level rise. The next series of slides focuses in on Needham, looking at infrastructure, society, and environment. This map of Needham identifies critical infrastructure, flood, fire potential, and high heat areas. The small green dots are critical infrastructure. This covers a broad range of facilities, including town buildings, schools, senior facilities, dams, wells, utilities, locations where hazardous materials are stored, needed services like pharmacies and grocery stores, and places people might gather like churches. Flooding is represented by FEMA flood zones, but also locations in dark blue where the town has identified that flooding has occurred in the past. The pink dots represent flood claims from March 2010. They are enlarged to comply with federal privacy requirements. You may remember that Eastern Massachusetts had severe flooding in March 2010. The Blue Hill Observatory recorded over 18 inches of rain in 17 days. The flooding led to a federal disaster declaration. We consider the March 2010 flooding to be an example of the type of flooding predicted to occur more frequently as the climate warms, and that is extreme rainfall amounts falling in the winter as rain rather than snow on frozen ground and while vegetation is still dormant. In Needham, 232 properties received disaster assistance, and all but one of the claims were located outside the FEMA flood zones. You can see they are concentrated in the more densely developed portion of Needham. This highlights the challenge of managing stormwater flooding and the reality that much of our flooding occurs outside of FEMA flood zones. Brush fire locations are highlighted in orange. These represent more thickly wooded areas where the potential for brush fire exists. Finally, the pink hatched areas represent hotter areas, identified as hotspots on this map. Remote sensing was used to record land temperatures on a cloudless day where temperatures were over 90 degrees. The pink hatched areas represent the hottest 5% of land temperatures in the 101 communities of Greater Boston represented by MAPC. Generally, your hotter areas will have a greater concentration of pavements and buildings. You can see that commercial areas along Route 128 and the central business locations in Needham represent most of the hotspots. Many of Needham's schools are also in hotspots as they have large parking lots, buildings, and in some cases turf fields. Of course, when it's hot out, it will be hot everywhere. Access to air conditioning can become a key issue, a key health issue during heat waves. Next, we look at societal issues. Just as some locations in Needham will be more vulnerable to climate impacts than others, it is also the case that some residents will be more vulnerable than others. Social vulnerability refers to social, economic, demographic, or health factors that may make groups of people less resilient to climate change impacts. This is analogous to what we're seeing today with the coronavirus, where age, health status, employment, and other socioeconomic characteristics impact vulnerability. People who may be more susceptible to negative health effects can include older adults, young children, pregnant women, people with disabilities, and people with pre-existing health conditions, as they're more likely to be physically vulnerable to the health impacts of extreme heat and the poor air quality that often accompanies heat waves. Individuals with physical mobility constraints may need additional assistance with emergency response. People who may have more difficulty adapting to, preparing for, or recovering from extreme weather events refers to socioeconomic characteristics such as income that can influence vulnerability to climate change. Low-income people are often more susceptible to financial shocks which can occur after extreme weather and which can impact financial security and the ability to secure safe shelter and meet medical needs. Social isolation can also influence vulnerability as it limits access to critical information, municipal resources, and social support systems. People at most risk for social isolation include those living alone and people with limited English language proficiency. People who live or work in vulnerable locations include historic or future flooding locations, areas prone to wildfire, hot areas, and neighborhoods prone to power outages. Vulnerable workers can include first responders, landscapers, construction workers, and those who work in hot indoor environments. MEPC projects that the number of children under age 5 will remain steady, while adults over 65 will grow to approximately 25% of the population in Needham by 2030. People living alone account for 22% of Needham's population, and over half of that group is age 65 years or older. Although Needham is a relatively affluent community, nearly 6% of residents are below the poverty level, and 20% are considered low income. A disproportionate percentage of older adults are low income. Prolonged heat can exacerbate illnesses such as asthma. Black and Latino residents are hospitalized for asthma at considerably higher rates than the population as a whole, demonstrating how underlying socioeconomic conditions can lead to differential impacts based on race and ethnicity. Needham has become more diverse in recent decades. Census data from 2018 indicates the trend is continuing, with Needham's Asian population, primarily of Chinese descent, at almost 10%. The next slides focus on the natural environment. Natural resources will be impacted and can have impacts on future climate change. On the positive side, natural resources lessen climate impacts by absorbing and storing carbon dioxide and by serving vital protective functions. Forests, open space, wetlands and rivers and streams protect drinking water quality, provide flood control, and give relief from extreme heat. Healthy ecosystems are more resistant to stresses from a changing climate and better able to protect against heat and flooding. Trees are important in mitigating the impact of heat waves. According to the EPA, suburban areas with mature trees are 4 to 6 degrees cooler than new suburbs without trees. Shaded surfaces can be 25 to 40 degrees cooler than the peak temperatures of unshaded surfaces. Trees also absorb remarkable quantities of precipitation. Research has shown that a typical medium-sized tree can intercept as much as 2,300 gallons of rain per year. Trees can also be a source of vulnerability, as fallen limbs and trees can cause power outages, block streets, and cause injuries and damage. Trees may be susceptible to new pests and diseases. They may also be weakened by flooding and drought. Over time, warming temperatures will change the mix of trees best adapted to our region. You can see that tree cover is greater in the less densely developed areas of Needham. The state identifies areas they call core habitat and critical natural landscape. These are intact landscapes that are better able to withstand climate stresses and support the long-term survival of rare species and natural habitats. They include areas along the Charles River, Cutler Park, and the Ridge Hill Reservation. The Conservation Department notes that Ridge Hill provides flood storage and flood damage protection, water quality protection, groundwater recharge to the town's aquifer, wildlife habitat, and educational values. Finally, rare species habitat identifies the known habitat areas for state-protected rare plant and animal species. Drought can have severe negative impacts on water quality and quantity. Low flow in rivers and streams affects aquatic habitat and can cause algal blooms and low dissolved oxygen. Flooding can wash pollutants into local waters, cause sewer overflows, and erode stream banks. Needham has numerous wetlands and streams and is encircled by the Charles River on 3 sides. Needham relies primarily on groundwater for its drinking water supply. Needham's healthy, intact freshwater wetland systems protect water quality and quantity, provide flood control, and maintain overall ecosystem health for climate resilience. At the MVP workshop, participants reviewed the same information you have just heard. They identified Needham's climate strengths and vulnerabilities in the areas of infrastructure, society, and environment. Then they proposed solutions for each vulnerability and went through a process of picking the top priorities. This photo shows the workshop results with the highest priorities and the dots representing votes for those priorities. And this is the list of top priorities. Communication refers to the need to communicate, especially during emergencies and to vulnerable or difficult to reach populations. Health impacts involves outreach and strategies to manage heat and mosquito and tick-borne illnesses. The town's efforts to manage stormwater were highlighted as a strength, but also as an ongoing need for funding, management, and retrofits. Water infrastructure addresses the need to protect both drinking water and sewer infrastructure. Trees and forest management focuses on protecting and planting trees. Robust infrastructure acknowledges the need for cybersecurity and energy redundancy. The Central Avenue Bridge was identified as infrastructure in need of upgrade. Climate impacts to the wetlands bylaw, along with public education, were recommended. Public housing for seniors was also identified as infrastructure in need of upgrade, as well as for contingency planning. Identifying residents with medical needs and coordinating with the hospital was recommended. Disaster response and evacuation planning was highlighted. In this case, Needham would not be starting from scratch to work on that. And finally, mapping hazardous material sites, which we've now done for the hazard mitigation plan, and communicating that information with the hospital was the final top priority. Thank you for listening to this presentation. When you close out of this slideshow, you will see 2 additional links on the web page. The first will take you to the draft MVP report. Please review the report for a more detailed summary of Needham's climate strengths, vulnerabilities, and action items. We reviewed the top priorities, but there were many additional worthy suggestions that may interest you. After you have a chance to review the report, please go to the final link, which will take you to a short survey where you can add your thoughts and priorities. The feedback we received from you will be included in the final version of the MVP report. Thanks again for your participation.